Well, hello everyone and welcome to Race Week for the Saturday recap, where today we will look back on a very fast day of track action at the Mugello circuit. So, let's go in to the qualifying day report. So, talking about practice 3, it was actually relatively uneventful in the end, but we did get more of an idea of the pace of everyone, of where everyone stood. But it was Valtteri Bottas who once again topped the session. He really looks to have a very good handle on the car around this circuit at this point of the weekend, and he had topped all three practice sessions ahead of Max Verstappen, which gave hope of a fight at the front. He was able to split the two Mercedes. The top three were separated by a tenth of a second. Then he had Lance Stroll. Pierre Gasly was looking good in the AlphaTauri ahead of Sergio Perez in sixth. It's obviously a better weekend for Ferrari than it has been last time, because obviously their issues aren't as exposed around here. Then you have Alex Albon, Danny Kvyat and Romain Grosjean rounds out the top 10. George Russell was unfortunately unable to get out in the final practice session due to a brake issue. But now, let's talk about qualifying. So, qualifying got underway in this afternoon in very hot conditions at the track, and we were all looking forward to seeing these cars at their best in qualifying trim around this thrilling Mugello circuit. Although we did get a little bit disappointed at the end of Q3, which due to a late red flag. But out of Q1 we already had a shock, as Pierre Gasly, apparently his team stated that it was a slight setup mistake that resulted in him in the balance not being there on Pierre's car, which meant that he could not clear Q1. He finished in 16th, and he was not that far off making it in. Sebastian Vettel just scraped in, but it would have been disappointing for him after his race win last week. He would have expected more, especially as he's looked good this weekend. I'm expecting a big charge from him in the race tomorrow. Then in 17th on the grid you have Antonio Giovinazzi. Didn't really see much of him, but he failed to make it past Q1. Now George Russell had quite an adventurous time in Q1. He was initially actually behind his teammate, but he managed to get ahead in the end. And then on his final run, he made a massive mistake on the exit in the far section. I can't remember the corner name, but he made a massive mistake and actually went into the gravel, but somehow saved it and did not actually lose much time. He obviously did lose time. He was on the exit of Savelli corner. He didn't quite get the line right, and then went slightly into the gravel. And then that slowed his time down quite a bit in the end. But he still was ahead of his teammate and Kevin Magnussen. Nicholas Latifi would have been a bit disappointed with 19th, because he showed reasonable pace earlier in the session. George Russell as well will also be ruining that mistake, because he wasn't far off making it into Q2. Without that mistake, it's likely that he would have made it into Q2. Whilst at the back of the grid will be Kevin Magnussen in the Haas, which is looking to be quite another difficult race for Haas. And then we move on to Q2. In 15th on the grid, we have Romain Grosjean. As I said, I'm expecting this to be quite a difficult weekend for the Haas team, unfortunately, because obviously, as I said, their tyres were having, until they're not the best on tyres, that could cause them real issues in tomorrow's race. But Romain Grosjean would have been pleased to get into Q2, but Sebastian Vettel once again failing to make it past Q2 I believe it's the first. I can't remember. I believe it's like the fourth. Isn't that the fourth straight time that he hasn't made it into Q3? But once again, an awful qualifying for Sebastian Vettel, and I'm pretty sure that he is looking forward to the end of this season where he can leave Ferrari and join that Aston Martin team. He was outpaced by the Ferrari customer, Kimi Raikkonen. I mean, that was a really good effort from him to get up into 13th place, showing that he does still have some of the talent that we know that he has. To qualify in 13th, that's a very good effort from him. In 12th on the grid, we have Danny Kvyat, who did not have the same balance issues as Pierre Gasly, but he could not make it into Q3. Whilst Lando Norris was bummed at the end of Q2, he was displaced by his teammate at the last minute, and it was really poor. McLaren seemed to have not as much pace, probably their most lackluster pace so far this year. And Lando Norris was displaced by his teammate at the last minute, and he starts in 11th. Then you have Q3. And then in 10th place on the grid, you have Esteban Ocon in the Renault. Again, Renault were expecting this to be, once again, to be a poor race for them. But they in the end, they struggled. Well, not struggled, I don't know what I'm saying there. But they did, in the end, manage to make it through in both cars into Q3. But Esteban Ocon didn't set an initial lap, and then he spun on his final run, which meant he didn't set a time and actually brought a premature end to Q3. It meant that only one driver was able to improve their lap time, which meant that was a bit of a damp squib at the end of the session. But Esteban Ocon, he starts in 10th, a little bit off his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, who starts in 8th. Carlos Sainz starts in 9th. I think McLaren will be quite pleased with that, to be honest, considering that they lacked pace. In 8th place, we have Daniel Ricciardo in the Renault, as I just mentioned. Then in 7th place, in qualifying in 7th was Lance Stroll, but in 6th and 7th were the two racing points. Sergio Perez qualified in 6th. Lance Stroll with interestingly ahead of Lance Stroll, who had some new aero bits on the car in the bargeboard and sidepod area of the car, which Sergio Perez will not be getting until Sochi in a couple of weeks' time. But Sergio Perez has a one-place grid penalty as a result of his incident with Kimi Raikkonen in second practice, so he starts in 7th. And then in 5th place, Charles Leclerc. He was the only driver who was able to improve on his lap time despite the red flag, because he had been past the red flag zone at the time of the incident happening. And he was able to improve to 5th. Charles Leclerc has at times been taking this car to places where it simply does not belong. I mean, Charles Leclerc does have a new chassis this weekend, which could also be helping, but qualifying in 5th place. And then an improvement for Alex Albon at the time where there's been a lot of questions about whether he and Pierre Gasly should be swapped. Yes, he's still 4/10 off his teammate, but that is an improvement to start in 4th on the second row. I believe that is his best qualifying of the season so far. In 3rd place, it's Max Verstappen. Everyone was hoping that he was going to get amongst the Mercedes, but throughout the weekend, he was looking on par. But Mercedes found an extra 3/10 come Q3, which meant that Max Verstappen starts in 3rd. And then you have the battle of the two Mercedes. Throughout the weekend, Valtteri Bottas looked to have the upper hand, but then come Q2, Lewis Hamilton took over. And then in the initial runs, he was able to get ahead of Valtteri Bottas by 0.05 of a second. And as the red flag, Lewis Hamilton was able to complete his second run, but he did not improve. As the yellow flags came out for Esteban Ocon's spin, Valtteri Bottas was unable to improve. So, taking a look at the starting grid for tomorrow's race then. It was Lewis Hamilton who takes pole position ahead of Valtteri Bottas in second. Then you have Max Verstappen, Alex Albon, Charles Leclerc, Lance Stroll, Sergio Perez, Daniel Ricciardo, Carlos Sainz and Esteban Ocon. Then you have Norris, Kvyat, Raikkonen, Vettel, Grosjean, Gasly. What can he do from 16th? Giovinazzi, Russell, Latifi and Magnussen. So that's the starting grid for tomorrow's Tuscan Grand Prix. I keep struggling to pronounce that. But in the roundup today, also just going to briefly mention what happened in the feeder series races. I will be doing a proper review on all junior series action from this weekend on Monday in the Road to F1 show. But I will be doing a brief description of what happened in each of the two races. And in the Formula 3 race, it was Frederik Vesti who took the victory for Prima. And Jake Hughes and Zendelli spent the whole race battling it out up front. Frederik Vesti seized the initiative and he managed to catch up to both and he passed them both. Jake Hughes did try to strike back towards the end, but Vesti managed to get back past on the final lap to take second place. Teo Porcher is finished in third place ahead of Lorenzo Zendelli in fourth, Enzo Fittipaldi in fifth. Logan Sargent crucially finishes in sixth place after, and as Oscar Piastri failed to score, he is actually now level on points with Oscar Piastri. I mean, Oscar Piastri still leads on countback, but they are level on points at the front. And that is going to... But to be honest, it has to be said, going into the season finale with a better grid position, it is advantage Sargent. Teo Porcher's not out of it now, only 9 points behind. And then it was Alexander Smolia finishing in 7th, David Beckman finishing in 8th, then he had Sebastian Fernandez in 9th, and Liam Lawson in 10th. Oscar Piastri critically missed out on that reverse grid pole, so that means he's got a lot of work to do to win the championship tomorrow. But it's been a really exciting season in Formula 3. A lot of people say it's the best ever in the history of the GP3/F3 series. So, who will win the championship tomorrow? And in the Formula 2 race, the Formula 2 saw an absolutely crazy race happen just then. And it was Nikita Mazepin who made an alternate strategy work and took advantage of a couple of safety cars at the end. The first one caused by Giuliano Alesi stopping out on track, and the second one caused by contact between Mick Schumacher, Guan Yu Zhou and Jack Aitken, which took both Zhou and Aitken out of the race. Guan Yu Zhou, who also was in a good position on the alternate strategy, and a lot of people think that he could easily have won that. And Nikita Mazepin won the race ahead of Luca Giotto in second. Louis Delatrez finished in third, having almost managed to pass Luca Giotto on the final lap, ahead of Felipe Drugovich in fourth. Mick Schumacher crucially finished in fifth. He lacked pace at the beginning of the race, but being on the alternate strategy when the safety car came out was the right place to be. And that meant that he finished in fifth place. And as both his rivals did not score, Callum Ilott was caught up in that skirmish between Zhou, Aitken and Schumacher, which meant that he had to pit. He eventually worked his way back up to 12th but didn't score any points. And Robert Schwartzman appeared to have some form of a gearbox failure, which obviously forced him out of the race. To be honest, I think Robert Schwartzman could easily have taken advantage of those safety cars. Real shame for him. That was. Christian Lundgaard led most of the way, but fell out of luck with the safety cars, and he was swamped by all the drivers on the fresh tyres. Juri Vips finished in 7th with Artem Markelov taking reverse grid pole. Then you have Marcus Armstrong, he'll be slightly disappointed with 9th, but he scores his first points since the Styrian round. And then in 10th place was Jehan Daruvala. Then you have Matsushita, Idot, PK, Sato, Nissani, Tsunoda finished in the points but had a time penalty. Ticktum was running well in the early stages, but he got swamped. He was hit by Tsunoda, who got that penalty. That was why he got the penalty, and then he got swamped by those drivers on the fresher tyres. With Guilherme Samaya rounding out the finish. There's Aitken, Zhu, Alesi and Schwartzman as the drivers who retired from the race. As I said, Mick Schumacher now leads the standings by 4 points back to Callum Idle in second, and Robert Schwartzman is 13 points behind Mick in third. The loss for him could have been worse, but he still is in this title fight, but he's got a lot of work to do tomorrow from the back of the grid. But you have to commend Nikita Mazepin. That was on the second restart, he absolutely nailed that move down the inside. Took the lead and never looked back. So that is it from this Saturday recap. Now, one thing I will talk about with the feeder series on the Saturday is what we learned in terms of the way they raced. We learned that the DRS zone is very powerful. Will it work as well for the Formula 1 cars as it has done for Formula 2 and Formula 3? Because drivers within like 3 or 4 tenths were able to have a run on the driver ahead. And also, particularly that first corner, we learned that you can get round the outside and down the inside as well. So that we could see some fairly interesting racing in the Grand Prix tomorrow. But that is it from the Race Week show. And we will see you tomorrow for the race review in what hopefully will be an interesting Tuscan Grand Prix. Goodbye.